Well, hello everybody and welcome to the channel. This is David Bianco. Today we're going to be taking a look at the UHQR release of Steely Dan's Countdown to Ecstasy. We're going to be comparing it to some original presses, including a quadrophonic release. That's coming up next at our Safe and Sound Texas audio excursion. So Steely Dan's second album, called Countdown to Ecstasy, was released in July 1973 on ABC Records here in the U.S. This album was in fact recorded at the Village Recorders in New York, and the only thing recorded outside of that was Rick Derringer's slide guitar for Showbiz Kids, which was done at the Caribou Ranch in Netherlands, Colorado. Now, between the first album and this, David Palmer was relieved of his duties with the band from the vocals he had done on the first record. So all the vocals from this LP forward were the responsibility of Donald Fagen, of course. Now, this album did not perform very well. It only got to number 35 on the top 100 Billboard charts, and it was only on there for 34 weeks. One of the big reasons, of course, is this album did not yield any singles off of it, so that dragged it down somewhat, of course. Now, the critics really liked this album quite a bit, actually, which really gave it some resonance in the industry. Over time, they believed this was where Steely Dan was really starting to bring those jazz chops into their rock and roll. And in fact, it was solidified with this album and carried through, as we know, in their catalog. Now, this was a sophomore release, meaning the second album, and often those albums are duds for bands. So for this one to be so highly acclaimed was quite an accomplishment, actually. So what I've done with this review is I'm going to be comparing an original I have, which is a white label promo on ABC, and I'll be comparing it also with my ABC Command Quadrophonic version, and also the UHQR, which is really what we're looking at. How good is this new UHQR 2LP 45 RPM, mastered by Bernie Grundman and released through Analogue Productions? Going to be taking a look at that. So right out of the box, one thing I can tell you is that the UHQR initially needed about a 2.5 dB boost to get itself on par with the loudness of the originals. So right away there was that. When it came to vinyl quietness, the UHQR was pretty quiet, with 10 being a dead quiet. This would get a 9. The OG was a 7 from my Santa Maria press I had, and I have a Pittman white label promo. They were both 7s, and then the quad was a 6. It was a tad bit noisier. Now, one thing about the UHQR that I have to mention, unfortunately, is that the flatness of the record was not on par with what I would expect for a higher grade record. As you can see in the video I'm showing you, basically the first disc I call the C6 Stylus, because that record is just kind of waving and moving up and down, and that was a little more abusive than I thought would be good for the stylus itself. So I had put it on another turntable initially to test it out to get that indication on it. The second side of the record, or second record of the set, it had the same but much less. So it was probably about 60% of what the first disc was. So the old records I have are very flat. 50 years old, and they're really very flat comparatively. So I'm not sure what the cause is there, but the UHQR certainly should be much flatter in my opinion. You know, I've moved these originals throughout the U.S. for 50 years, state to state, box to box, and they still are pretty darn flat. So that was a bit of a disappointment. Now, one thing I always check when I get these UHQRs now, having met with Chad, talked to Chad about the process he uses and all, is that he has Bernie remaster sides of the record based on his listening, Chad's listening in his office and comparing them, A being those very quickly side by side, and he has him provide various cuts. And then in the dead wax, you can see whether that side is in fact a revised cut or it's the original cut. In this case, on this record, side A shows an RE-5, which means it was the 6th release, meaning the first one has no RE on it, and then the second cut is RE1, and the third is RE2, the revisions. So RE5 means it was cut 6 times, and that was the one he picked, the 6th cut. Side B was an RE2, which means it was the 3rd cut that he picked from that. Side C was an RE7, which means it was 8. And I think 8 is the most that he said he would ever have done because of the contract. And ironically, side D had no RE. So that means it was the first attempt that he thought that one was good by the time they got to there. So just interesting noting of that. So on to the actual record. So what I've done is gone track by track and kind of given some comments on what I think of the track itself and where the UHQR stood or stood out or didn't stand out as it related to the song. The first song, as I always mispronounce, is Bodhisattva or Stava or Steva or Stiva. It's Bodhisattva. Anyway, the song had really on the UHQR a real driving beat, some very rich lows and clean highs. The vocals were nicely forwarded and the sound stage was more open than the OG. So that was a good experience starting off with that track. That's a pretty fast-moving track, and it really did, in fact, show what you could do with this UHQR. Got to the second track and looked at Razor Boy, and the vocals were smoother than the OG. It was very quiet at the beginning passage where it is quieter. And the taps on the xylophone during this song, you can almost kind of feel the impact more than just hearing the resulting sound. So that was a nice feel that song brought across in the UHQR. The Boston Rag was next. And it had slightly more of an open stage, I would say, with the instruments, and the vocals felt restricted back in the OG, if not downright rough, whereas the UHQR, unfortunately, it really only could exacerbate that to some degree, because I think there were some limits in the vocal recording on this particular track. And so the UHQR, in fact, made that a little more evident. But again, I think it may have been something that really couldn't be corrected. But there definitely had a more open sound stage to it, which was appealing to listen to. Next came the song Your Gold Teeth. So this is an interesting song because it's one that I really didn't like a lot from all the years past. But this one started out with the rhythm section on the UHQR really strong, and it hits you really kind of mid-level in the gut a bit. The percussion and guitar work, the blending of that had a really smooth synergy to it. The vocals were pressing slightly forward with duets gaining a thicker presence in comparison to the solo vocal. So really, when the voices came together, it just had a little thicker sound, a little more rich sound to it, which was really, really nice and engaging. The percussion that came along mid-song was very engaging and blended very well with the keyboard solo that was going on. And it created somewhat of a ambient sound stage of the percussion and the keyboards on their own, which broadened when the guitar solo came in and replaced the keyboard, and that percussion stayed there then with the guitar. It was just an interesting transition of sound, and it was really kind of rich. I really enjoyed it. It's as if the complexity of the song was maturing in its presentation to make it more engaging than I ever felt with the OG. To me, this is really what superb mastering can do. This presentation in the recording, taking a song and then elevating it to an enhanced experience. The percussion drive toward the end of the track with the keyboards feels like an independent jam session almost. It doesn't just sound like one, it felt like one. It took a song that I really didn't like that much and really converted it into a new listening experience and appreciation. And I think that's one of the things something like this should give you. So I was very, very positive toward that and surprised by it, honestly. I really didn't think that song was going to do much for me because it wasn't one of my favorites on the album, and now I find it very engaging. Next we go then to Showbiz Kids, which would be on the second disc there, the B-side on a regular 33. And here we have Rick Derringer with his guitars, slide guitar, that smooth presence of that throughout the song. And in this song, the chorus voices have a bit of an ambient lift almost on the UHQR above the lead vocals. And that was a very important aura that was added to this song, actually. The next song is My Old School, which is probably the most well-known song I might think off of this album. Certainly is for me. It's not really rich in content early in the song, but as it builds, it has more accuracy in the voices and the instruments. The presence is there on the UHQR, and the chorus and lead vocals do a really nice job of blending, but they do have some distinctness as well. So it's really a nice, rich compatibility, I would say, that occurs. And then you get the horns coming into here, and they are really kind of airy on the UHQR and have some very open sound to them with a nice soundstage presence. And then on the percussion side, you have the snare hits and the guitar solos that are very precise as you progress through the song. Really an enjoyable listen to that one. Pearl of the Quarters, the next song, really clean and smooth delivery on this. It's almost like the smoothness of the UHQR is almost compatible with this song, like they really go hand in hand, really had that feel to it. The lead vocal clarity and placement on this one in the UHQR is much superior to the originals, and the vocal duet has a layering to it. It's not really as evident in the OG. And that layering really is nice. It really creates a nice blend and sound stage for that. And this song contains some really nice crisp cymbal hits. They're blended very well into the presentation with no semblance whatsoever. And then we end up with King of the World. It's spacious in instruments. The voices are smooth and more forward on the UHQR. It has some really clear snare and hi-hat hits that drive the song at a really, really warm feeling, in the sense that you can kind of feel like you're sitting next to the drummer at the time that those are being hit. And it really kind of engages you into that song. So those are my impressions of the UHQR. Now, I gave you some comparisons to the originals on some of the songs. I would say overall that the UHQR gets the nod because it really is a richer sound. It is a little bit smoother, a little more spacious, and really just enjoyable. The Santa Maria press that I have sounds really good, as well as the white label promo, which is a Pittman press. And so all of those are fine, and also the Quadrophonic I'll talk about here in a minute. But for me, my go-to now moves to the UHQR. Now, the exercise activity of getting up more frequently for these songs, 2 on a side, 8 to 10 minutes. Yeah, that's a little bit of cardio, but it sure is an enjoyable reason to get up. And again, a few of these songs I really enjoy much more now, with Your Gold Teeth being probably the most stellar example to me of a song that really got transformed to my listening. Now, in fairness, related to the quad, I default to the quad before I got to the UHQR as my go-to listening copy for years because I have a quad setup. And it's an excellent QS matrix, and the rear channel do provide some additional aura from the stereo version compared. I can see the UHQR remaster was able to extrapolate maybe some of that presence, which was a little bit less evident in the OG stereos. And while I still will enjoy the quad for that spatial presentation, the UHQR has more sonic accuracy and intensity compared to the quad or the OG. And so for a minimum record flip experience, I can stick with the quad. I can play one of the originals. They all sound decent. But to really be delighted by the recording and really start to enjoy this a little bit more than I did in the past, I definitely have to go to the UHQR. For me, it's a much more pleasant and enjoyable listening experience, and the album is much richer to me. And so when I look at spending more money on a record, that's really what I'm after. Is it more enjoyable to listen to? Now, if you're going to sit and A-B things back and forth for the rest of your life, it's easy to become cynical about certain things. And these particular shootouts and aspects like this are for basically evaluating and determining what is the difference in these higher priced records and what is the value that you get out of it. And for me, that's really what I'm looking to accomplish. I know that I'm not going to get a carbon copy. I'm going to get something somewhat different in some way. Sometimes it's a small delta or difference. Sometimes it's a larger difference. Sometimes it feels positive. Sometimes it feels negative. But in most cases, what we see with these is I think one has to sit and listen several times and get to understand the music and the presentation and really start to divorce ourselves a little bit of this real discrete binary type of decision making. Because I think we miss out on the opportunity to understand what some of the additional enhancements are in these mastering choices. So for now, I appreciate you coming by. As always, if you haven't subscribed, I'd appreciate you considering that by pressing on the bell and the all option. And a thumbs up or like is appreciated for this video for the algorithm, and comments are always welcome. I love responding to those as well. So until we catch you next time, thanks again for joining us until our next Safe and Sound Texas audio excursion. Take care, everybody.